that stuff, and then talk about some of the stuff that transpired as a result. Um, but for now, let's go ahead and do a quick refresher of last week where I showed you where I was actually in the desert. And if you look on the map there, you'll see the patch for the 1st Cavalry in the center towards the bottom down there. It's looks kind of like an upside down arrowhead. It's got rounded corners. It's got a horse in the upper right hand corner and a black slash through it. That's the 1st Cavalry Division. That's where they were. Now, if you look right below that, you'll see Alpha Robotin. Alpha Robotin was a little town that was at an intersection of two of the northernmost paved roads in Saudi Arabia. And my unit and where I was located at was approximately 12 miles east of that. So literally, I was like halfway between that and that other military base that's designated by the white circle and the blue hash mark. So I was sitting about halfway in between there. And before the war started, before the ground assault started, the 1st Cavalry Division was actually behind us, and then the 1st Infantry Division was still in front of us. But this basically is showing the movements that the 7th Corps took during Desert Storm, and my unit was actually a part of the 7th Corps. 7th Corps Command and its responsibilities. So that was that. Now, as far as this week, like I said, I want to focus more on the people that I was with. So the only photo that I've been able to actually find of anybody in my unit was this photo. And this photo basically consists of some of the nurses that were in my unit, both male and female. And if I'm not mistaken, and I remember correctly, the gentleman back there in the middle in the back, it was actually the chaplain, and I'll be discussing him a little bit later. But I just wanted to show you that. You know, these were some pretty cool folks, got along with them great. Some of them had some abrasive, you know, personalities that were Class A type guys. But for the most part, I got along with everybody, you know, before the war. We basically were like a family, really. But that quickly changed once we actually got in zone. But I'll discuss that in a little bit later. For now, though, what I do want to do is I want to show you some of the equipment that I actually had when I was over there, and show you some of the equipment that we actually used. And these right here are actually a pair of sunglasses that were Army issued. Now, just to show you what they look like, and believe me, they aren't pretty. They're not something that you would wear in the civilian world or wear out, because you'll be made fun of. That's them right there, all right? And that's what they hooked onto your ears with. And if you were actually here, you could actually see some of the markings from my actual use from back in the day. But yeah, they go on, and they basically look like this, you know. And we would actually wear these on the inside of the big goggles that we would have when the sandstorms came through that I talked to you about last week. And if you saw that episode, you know exactly why it was necessary to have those big old goggles plus these sunglasses on underneath. Some of the big old goggles that we had actually had like tin on them, so they were kind of worked as double duty as sunglasses and those. And if you were fortunate enough and lucky enough to have those, well then, you know, you had your sunglasses and those combination as well. Now, this I think everybody is familiar with. This was my canteen. Um, Bad part about it is, as you can see, there's no actual port on the top of it, and what we call that was the NBC port. So if we had an NBC attack, there was no way that I could actually drink the water from this through my mask, because it didn't have that NBC port on there, which I wasn't too happy about that. And believe me, I complained about it quite a bit. But I also realized after a few times of complaining about it that nothing was going to be done about it, so I just lived with it and dealt with it. Fortunately, we never actually had a chemical attack where we were, so I didn't really have to worry about that. Now, some of you might have noticed the pouch there on the front side of this canteen. And what this is actually for, as you can see, it's not really all that big. I can only get 2 fingers in there. But what that's actually for is for your water purification tablets. Back then we used iodine to purify the water. Um, wasn't the greatest taste in the world, but you know, at least you knew your water was clean and you weren't going to get any kind of diseases or anything like that from it. Now, those of you that have ever served in the military or ever known anybody in the military have probably seen one of these too. The good old-fashioned elbow flashlight. Um, they take double D batteries. The top part here, you can actually unscrew that, and on the inside there, as you can see, you get a red filter. Now, we use the red lights and whatnot when we were in the dark and out in the field by virtue of the fact that it didn't have a signature like a white light did. Now, if you've ever been outside at night, white lights you can see coming from a long way away. In the military, even without NVGs, a white light you can see, you know, 4 or 5 miles away. Red light, you're going to have to be quite a bit closer to be able to see that. So it was part of what we called noise and light discipline. Noise and light discipline was basically keeping your footprint and your track as small as possible and being as unnoticeable as possible while you were out there. But these also made things a little hard to see too. There's also a blue filter in there. I'm not sure if I actually still have these all the filters for this or not. But in the bottom here where the spring is, you can, I don't know if you can actually see that or not. Camera's not wanting to focus on it, but down inside there, there's actually a little light bulb there, a little bulb, a replacement bulb, so that if the bulb actually burns out, you can replace it. Plus, you also had other filters. There was like a blue filter and then a clear filter, so that was interchangeable and whatnot. So it had multiple purposes and uses, and I used them a lot, especially at night. But because especially in the desert, because out there in the desert when there's no moon, boy, you can't even see your hand touching your nose. I mean, literally, like this, you can't see your hand. It gets that dark out there. But these were my combat boots. These were my desert boots. When we got issued the chocolate chips, these were the boots that we got to come with it. And they worked really good. I was actually quite surprised. Did a good job of keeping the sand out of your feet. With this nylon sides on there, I was kind of surprised by that, but it did. Didn't have a whole lot of problem with feet getting rubbed raw or anything like that. And surprisingly enough, they actually kept our feet pretty cool, which was important out there in the desert, because during the day, especially in the summertime, it could get up to be 145, 150, 160 degrees Fahrenheit. And then at night, it could drop all the way down to 70, 80, maybe 90 degrees. And that may not seem like, my God, that's still hot. But if you're in that 140, 150, 160 degree weather, and then it drops to 80 degrees at night, you're talking, you know, a 60, 70, 80 degree drop in temperature. And that 80 degrees will feel like 32 degrees. So that was something we had to get used to, and that was pretty crazy, because they gave us our winter sleeping bags, and we were sitting there thinking to ourselves, why are we going to need these? We're out in the middle of the desert. But when the summertime rolled around and you had that 60 degree change in weather, we were glad we had them. Now earlier I mentioned when I was talking about the canteen, the NBC port. A lot of folks haven't, you know, you guys have probably seen the military NBC masks, or the protective masks, i.e. gas masks. What you don't really get to see a lot of are the filters, and the canister filters. I happened to be lucky and managed to hang on to one when we came back, because when we did our field turn in, this got left behind by accident, and as a result I ended up with it, and they wrote it off as a combat loss. So I have it. It's still good. It could still be used. Unfortunately, the little locking pin that goes on the bottom isn't there anymore, which would be necessary to hook into this little loop right here that's, you know, pulled up here. And you turn around and open it up. It like has its own can opener type thing, and then that's what that was. But it's really easy to get these things opened up anyway. You can actually take a multi tool, slip it in there, pinch down on it, and then roll up that metal just like you would if you actually had that key for it. Um, but I haven't opened it. I'm not gonna open it because who knows? Who knows when I might need it again? Hopefully I'll never need it, but you never know, especially with modern times and the way things are going these days. But anyway, that pretty much covers my personal equipment. As far as the unit equipment goes, I figured I'd take some time to show you guys what our tents look like. We have multiple tents. This one is what was known as a GP large. We also had one that was GP medium. And they look the same, but the GP larges were a little bit longer. And I mentioned last week when I talked about the sandstorms that we would batten down the hatches. So when a sandstorm would blow through, all those little window flaps would get rolled down, they get tied down, and then those flaps down there at the bottom would actually get folded out and laid flat, and then that's what we would put the sand on top of and also put the sandbags on. And then on the inside, if you were lucky enough, you also had a white liner that would go on the inside of the canvas area, which would help keep you cooler during the day and also help hold the warmth in at night, especially if you didn't have any kind of heating or air conditioning type stuff going on. And with my unit, we didn't have any of that stuff. Because with the 145th Medical Clearing Company, we basically only held on to folks for about 8 hours, and then we were pushing them off to a field medical hospital. So we didn't really require the air conditioning units or anything like that. So we ended up basically with a white liner and a canvas if we were lucky. If we weren't, then we had just the canvas, and well, that thing just stayed hot all the time. But yeah, we would batten all those things down, close all that stuff up, put the sand and sandbags on top of those flaps. We'd close the doors to the tent, and the sand would still get in there. But this is pretty much what we would live in, and we could get roughly 20 to 30 guys into a GP medium. Probably have about 2 feet worth of space in between each cot, and that was the way we lived for a good 6-7 months. As far as our sleeping quarters and whatnot. Now there was one other tent that we had commonly used, and one other tent that we had in my unit, and that was the GP small tent, which was basically just big enough for about 6 people to fit into. It's the one right there in the middle. It looks like a little circle, but it's more like an octagon type thing. And basically I stayed in that initially because at the time I was a chaplain's assistant. And I stayed in there with the chaplain. That was our sleeping quarters, but it was also it also doubled as our office. So the front half of it, we would put up a curtain to block off our sleeping quarters, and then the front half of it would be our office where the chaplain would do counseling sessions, do paperwork. I would do supply work, make sure our logistics were straight, all that kind of stuff. So the front half was our office, our working area, and the back half ended up being our sleeping area. And well, that eventually changed a month or two into my time in Desert Storm, but I'll get into that in a little bit because I want to show you our showers and our latrines first, because in order for you to understand the story that I'm going to tell you about the chaplain and myself and what happened to me in Desert Storm, you're going to have to see this stuff in order to really kind of picture what I'm talking about. Now this was what our showers looked like. It wasn't the showers that we had at my unit, but this is what they look like. And we basically had 3 of them, just like this picture is showing. And what you see up top, on top of all these makeshift built things that the engineers made for us, were basically tubs of water. They would catch rainwater or the engineers would bring in water and buffaloes and stuff, or we'd send somebody on a water run to fill up a water buffalo, and then we'd fill these tanks up with that water. And then what you see up there is what we call space heaters. So there were heaters that actually went down into these tubs and heated up the water so that we would have hot water to take a shower with. And there was only three. Well, we had 4 showers, so we had a total of 4 showers for I think it was like 170 something people had to share 4 showers. So you can imagine the lines would get backed up, and there'd be times where you couldn't even get into the showers because the lines were so long and there were so many, all 4 showers were being used. But anyway, those were the showers. I'll get back to that because that's going to be a part of my story a little bit later. The next thing I want to share with you is what our latrines look like, because I told you a couple of stories about the latrines last week, but I wanted you to see what they actually look like. So as you can see, the lower half of it is wood, and it's basically like real thin plywood. We're talking, you know, maybe a 1/4 inch plywood that runs around the bottom half of that so that it closes everything off. And then inside there were 4 seats, which basically consisted of a lid. It was a bench that had holes cut in it, and then they put the toilet lids over the top of it. And then the top half, as you can see there, was screened in. If you were lucky enough to have extra sandbags, you could cut those up and place those up there so that they couldn't see in there. But for the most part, when you walk past, you could see anybody that was sitting in the latrine taking care of their business. But this is the door side of it. This was the door that it had to go through. And when you're wearing all that combat gear and stuff, your body plus the combat gear was too wide to fit through that door, so you had to turn sideways to slide in there with all your combat gear and your weapon to be able to get in there and to begin with. And then it was just like a huge chore and a huge routine just to undo some of your combat gear so you pull your pants down and go to the bathroom. So if you felt it coming on, you might as well just head that direction, because by the time you took care of everything and were able to relieve yourself, you're probably going to mess up your britches in the process. But let's take a look at the closer look at the inside of the latrine. And this is basically what it looked like inside the latrine. You had a water bottle that acted as like your door spring. So when you opened up the door, that bottle would raise up, it allow somebody to walk in, and then the bottle would help pull the door back closed. And then the cans there were designed for people to be able to put the toilet paper on there so the toilet paper wouldn't get wet or messed up or whatever. Because some people, they just couldn't hit the hole to save their lives. Either that or, you know, they intentionally missed, one of the two. But either way, you wanted that toilet paper there, and you wanted it up on top of those little cans there so it stayed dry and stayed clean, so that when you needed to pop a squat and drop a deuce, you could line the seat with the toilet paper and not make physical contact with it. So, I mean, that's what the inside of these things look like. Now, go ahead and pull me back up in the program, if you would, Cody, because it's going to take a minute. So now now that you've had a chance to see this stuff, I want to tell you a little bit about my story. And I want you to see my face. I want you to realize, I want you to look into my eyes. I want you to realize that what I'm about to tell you is the actual honest to God goodness truth. It's not baloney. It's not just my interpretation of it, and I'll explain that later as to why, you know, that came to be. But after about a month or 2 of being in Saudi Arabia, I started noticing that the morale of the unit and the mentality of the people were changing. All the normal societal norms and rules that we lived under here in the United States, as far as courtesy and respect and just overall general concepts of how to treat people, basically went out the window after a couple of months of being there. Stress levels were so high, you were constantly dealing with the thought of, you know, the enemy could come over our berm, over our perimeter at any given time, shoot us, drop artillery shells on us. Chemical warfare was a possibility. So, I mean, the stress level was through the roof, and it was 24/7 nonstop. So eventually it's going to start having an effect. Well, societal norms went out the window, and new norms were created within the unit and within the people within the unit. So you started having this new social dynamic that you had to deal with. Some things were good, some things were bad, some things you just sat there and shook your head and was like, "What are you guys thinking?" Um, we actually had, well, a couple of my friends, my personal friends that I hung out with when we were stateside before the war, were married, and we were good friends. We went to school together. We went to the same church together. Um, we ate together a lot of times. We went out and hung out and watched movies and did things together. And within a couple of months, they weren't talking to me. They were staying off to their side. The husband found out that the wife had cheated on her with one of the other guys in the unit. So there was that whole dynamic. You know, I was trying to keep him out of trouble, keep them from getting into a fight. They had to be separated and put into separate tents, both he from his wife and his wife from him, but also from the guy that she cheated on him with. They all had to be kept in separate tents. And that was just a dynamic that really didn't need to be there because the stress level was already high enough as it was. But now you got this added on top of it. You know, and then it's just one thing after another. Every time I turn around, I was just noticing how things were changing, and people's morale were getting really, really, really low. And I looked around, and the chaplain was doing nothing to address the issue. And if anybody is familiar with the chaplain's role in the military, essentially he is the morale officer. I mean, there are other people that help, contribute to that and are responsible for looking after that, but it's the chaplain's sole responsibility to look after the morale of the soldiers, both spiritually, mentally, and physically. The medics take on part of that role in looking out for the physical part of things on a medical level, the cooks as well, et cetera, et cetera. But in general, the chaplain is the psychologist and is the spiritual guide and the leader of the unit, and he's the one who's responsible for taking care of those things. And aside from doing, a weekly chapel service that lasted maybe 15, 20 minutes, he really wasn't doing anything. And I just kept watching this morale decline and get worse and worse and worse and worse. So I brought up to him, I said, hey, since they've decided not to house the ladies and the female nurses and stuff in the GP Large that we set up for them, because, well, I'm not even going to get into that. These ladies were too bougie, and when they were trying to set up their tent, ow, I broke a nail. We can't do this. We don't have enough strength. Okay, whatever. So then we had to put their tent up for them. GP Large, it's the hardest tent to friggin' set up out of the GP Medium, GP Large, and GP Smalls. It's hard. It's tough. It takes about 6 guys to set one of those things up. 6 very physically fit guys to do that. All right. They had 12 women out there, and 12 women couldn't get this tent up. So we had to go over there and put this tent up for them. Well, eventually, the command, which I'll get to in a minute, decided that it was a good idea to take those ladies out of the tent, out of the GP Large, and put them in with the rest of us in the GP Medium tents. So now you had males and females sleeping in the same tents, meaning no privacy, no curtains, no nothing, cot, right next to each other, less than 2 feet apart, male and female. What do you think happened? Yeah, there were a lot of hookups. A lot of hookups and a lot of promiscuity going on, which didn't help the morale of the unit at all, because now you had all these little, cockfights going on, people trying to cockblock each other and all this other kind of stuff. And it turned into, it got to a point where I literally thought I was living with 170 something kindergartners. It got so bad. So I talked to the chaplain. I said, hey, since they're not using the GP large, why don't we get with the chain of command and see if we can translate that into a chapel slash recreation room? Use it for a chapel, plus, you know, put up some TVs or something that are starting to come in now because we're like 3 months into this thing. And, you know, AAFES is starting to bring in connexes to do, you know, PXs with and commissaries and all this other stuff for us to have some kind of sense of normalcy while we're out there. And apparently he didn't like that too much. And next thing I know, he complains to the chain of command. And then he started noticing that I was doing what was known as field baths, because I would go out to the showers, and when the showers weren't busy and there weren't, you know, every shower full and a line a half a mile long waiting for the showers, I would just do what was known as a field bath. You take a washcloth, you fill up your helmet with water, you take a washcloth with some soap, and you wash your pits, you wash your groin, and you wash your backside. And that keeps you healthy enough to keep from getting diseases and keeps you from smelling and all that other kind of crazy, nasty stuff that's just very unhygienic. And you would also use that, you know, as well. Not the same water, of course, but, you know, later you would dump that out, rinse out your Kevlar helmet or your steel pot and clean that all out. And then you fill it back up with water again, and you'd use it to brush your teeth. When you were done, you clean it out, you dry it off and that stuff, and it was ready to go to protect your noggin again. But that's how you did field baths, all right? And I did those on a daily basis, all right? But apparently, for some reason, this guy thought that it was absolutely positively 100% necessary for you to have to be in the shower every day. This coming from a guy who would go into the freaking showers 3 times a day, when everybody else was lucky to get it once every 2 days. That was the routine. You got to go to the showers once every 2 days in order to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to get a shower. Well, human nature, obviously, some people went there every day. In the chaplain's case, he went there 3 times a day. So I speak up and I say something about it. I say, hey, this ain't right. You know, what's the deal? He didn't like that either. So guess what he does? He goes to the chain of command, tells them I'm not taking a shower every day. Next thing I know, they're telling me, well, guess what? For corrective training, you're going to do waste disposal. Now, if you don't know what waste disposal is or what it was like in Desert Storm, because you didn't see those reports on the news, well, I'm about to introduce you to it right now. So right here, there's the latrine. You see those 55-gallon drums that have been sawed off? Well, that's what was underneath the toilet seats inside the latrine that you peed in and you dropped deuces into. It had to go somewhere. And the engineers would come in and they dig this huge pit. But before you could put it in the pit, in order for it to be sanitary so it doesn't spread disease or cause problems in the field, you got to burn it. And this is what that looked like. And when you burned it, you had to do a certain mix of diesel fuel, because that burned hotter, burned longer. But then, and then you had to put in a certain amount of gas in order for this mixture to work properly. And once you did that, then you had to stir it all up. That's what that stick-looking thing coming out of that bucket is. It's the stir stick, where you're standing over it, stirring up this gas and this diesel and human waste. Had to mix it all up real nice and good so it looked like a paste. And then you would light it on fire. And you had to stand back. If you had too much diesel in it, it wouldn't light. You had to add more gas in order to get it to light. If it went, you had too much gas in it. And you weren't about to put more diesel in there until that gas burned off. Which means you had to do it a second time. And believe me, it's bad enough doing it once. All right? Well, their idea of corrective training was I had to do this every day. I did this every day for 3 months. until my chain of command got changed. And the reason that it got changed was because our unit commander ended up being diagnosed as being psychologically unfit for duty and was relieved of command and sent home and put into a psychiatric facility. Go ahead and pull me back up, Cody. And I tell you what, when you got leadership like that, it puts people's lives in danger. It puts them in danger. And it wasn't until he was relieved of command that my first sergeant actually had the balls enough to finally stand up for me and say, hey, what we've been doing to this guy isn't right. Now, in the meantime, the chaplain, who had me kicked out of his tent and put into a GP medium with the males and females so that I couldn't be aware of what he was doing on a regular basis, and he, quote unquote, couldn't smell me, even though he inspected my body twice a day, once in the morning, once in the evening. And when he inspected my body, and I mean, I had to get butt naked in front of him to let him inspect my body. That was part of my corrective training. All right. You have any idea how humiliating that is when you're doing the right thing and somebody forces you to have to do that and you can't fight back against it because your first sergeant's too much of a freaking coward to stand up against an officer who's gone psychologically mad? That's what I dealt with for basically 5 months of being there. You know, the chaplain kicks me out, so now I'm with everybody else, which is fine because it let me keep in tune with how the morale and everything was going. And once they transitioned the GP large that we originally put up for the females into a recreational tent and into the chapel tent, morale started improving. Still wasn't great. Still had all the other garbage I told you about earlier, but at least it was getting better. The chaplain had his own tent and stuff like that. So, I mean, you know, hey, I was kind of away from it. Finally, once the chain of command got changed, the first sergeant stood up for me. I got pulled off of the waste management duty, but then I turned around and ended up having to pull guard duty on a regular freaking basis instead of doing my job. The only time I really got to do my job was when the chaplain had to go to another compound or go to another location to provide services for somebody else. Like after the ground war started, some of our troops were at Log Base Echo. Some of us were at Log Base Alpha. Some of us got sent up into Kuwait. Some of us got sent up into other places in Iraq. And so we were all spread out everywhere, but it was still his responsibility to see to it that those soldiers' spiritual and psychological needs were being met. Well, this guy was half nuts himself, so I don't know how he ever became a chaplain, but he did, and he was the chaplain I had to serve with during Desert Storm, which sucked. Really sucked. And I can't even emphasize that word enough without YouTube banning me from saying the words that should be used to describe it. But nevertheless, you know, when he went to one of these other compounds, that's when I would get to do my job and I would get to go with him. Otherwise, I didn't get to do my job. I was doing all the menial tasks nobody wanted to do because I was a dirtbag soldier, even though I was looking out for my unit and trying to do my job. So, leadership is an important thing. They say there's no such thing as bad soldiers, just bad leadership. Well, guess what? They're absolutely right. When you got bad leadership, people die in combat and people's lives get destroyed forever. That chaplain violated 9 times, had 9 counts of Privacy Act violation against him by the time it was all said, done, and over with. And I'm not even going to get into that because I'm going to get too worked up over it because it drives me nuts when somebody in leadership, especially spiritual leadership, does something as corrupt and evil as what this man was doing and what he had done, and then gets backed up by the chain of command. Even the ones who know what's going on is wrong and won't stand up for it. That's just wrong. Just flat out wrong. So, corrupt leadership does exist. When you're trying to deal with it, unless you go over their head, usurp the chain of command, as it said, which could potentially get you court-martialed, you can't do anything about it because your leadership is the one that's the problem. So what do? Well, you bide your time. You wait it out. Once I got back to the States, I immediately put in for a transfer to another unit. I went from a medical unit to a light infantry unit. Big change. Anybody that's in the military knows how big of a change that is. Big change, but I didn't care because I had to get away from that bad leadership. When I went back to that unit, because I had to sign for my Kuwaiti Liberation Medal that was awarded to us by Saudi Arabia, you know, the one that I had $150 worth of white gold in it at the time, which is probably worth a lot more than that now. I don't know. Mine got lost in the process of moving around, and it was in the stuff that I lost a few years back because of a storage issue. Nevertheless, I had to go back there and I had to sign for it. I didn't want to go back there. I didn't want to see it again because I couldn't stand the leadership, and I knew the leadership was still the same and was going to be there. But when I got there, I found out that the chaplain was no longer there. And then as I was leaving, I was trying to leave and get out of there before the first sergeant or the company commander or anybody else in the leadership saw me. So I could get in, get out, and not have to worry about it and not be reminded of what happened over in Desert Storm. Well, the first sergeant saw me. Guess what? He catches me, and I said, First Sergeant, I mean no disrespect, but I got to run. I got somewhere to be. Got an appointment at such and such a time. If you want to talk to me, please walk and talk. So guess what? He did. Come to find out, about a month after we got back from Desert Storm, he ended up having to go do this ministry thing somewhere else in the state. On his way back, his trailer, his wife, and his kids all burned down to the ground. Yeah, you heard me right. He lost his whole family in one night and lost all of his possessions in one night except for the stuff that was in his truck with him while he was gone. Then, when he decides that he's going to transfer down to the Florida National Guard, on his way to Florida, his truck catches fire and burns up everything else that he had, so when he gets to Florida, the only thing he has is the clothes on his back. Now, I don't know about you, but as much as that man did to me and as much as I had a right to despise that man, I never in my life would wish something like that on anyone. And that broke my heart. I got on my knees and I was talking to God. I wanted to know why this happened to that man. I mean, yeah, he broke the law. He violated the law. He did a lot of dirty, crappy stuff, and he should have been held accountable. But that was some severe stuff. That was some severe stuff. Well, after doing some investigation, I come to find out he had a long track record of doing that kind of stuff. So there's a principle in the Bible called sowing and reaping. In other words, you sow a seed, whatever seed it is you sow, that's going to be the harvest that you reap from that seed. Modern day, a lot of people want to refer to it as karma, which give out and eventually comes back around to you. Well, sowing and reaping, karma, kind of the same thing, but not, it's on the same principle, right? Only with karma, I think it is, if you sow bad stuff, it comes back on you 3 times more. If you sow good stuff, it comes back on you 3 times more or something like that. Well, sowing and reaping is kind of similar to that, but there's different levels to the sowing and reaping, but same concept. So apparently this guy has put out so much stuff that it came back on him in a really bad way. And I felt bad for him. But I will never forget Desert Storm because of combat, because of the things that I saw at some of the other posts. Like, for example, going to Log Base Echo one time on the way there. We stopped by a roadside market, and I'm sitting there watching the vehicle. Me and another guy that were there, we didn't want to go into the roadside market. The chaplain and somebody else were grabbing us something to drink anyway, so we didn't really need to go into the market. But they went into the market, and while we're sitting there in the vehicle, these little kids come up, open up the door, reach in, grab stuff, and take off running with it. Well, one of the kids opened up my door, reached in and tried to grab my weapon. That's a big no-no. That is a big no-no. I put my shoe and my boot on his hips, and I pushed him away and pulled my weapon away. Didn't hurt the kid, but I had to get my weapon back. It was too dangerous. I couldn't let a little 8, 9, 10-year-old kid have my M16. There's no way that was going to happen. My life depended on it. The chaplain's life depended on it. The people in that vehicle with me, lives depended on it. And in the hands of somebody that's not trained, it can be very dangerous. So no way. Put my foot on his hips, pushed him away. and then secured my weapon to where he couldn't get to it. No more than I pulled my foot away, then the kid was back into my vehicle, reached into the compartment on the back of the front seat, and pulled out this magazine. Now, mind you, I'm sitting behind the chaplain. This is the chaplain's seat, right? Anything that the chaplain is carrying with him has to go in that seat, in that compartment on the back of his seat, so that he has easy access to it. I have easy access to it, so I can retrieve it and give it to him. You know what this kid pulled out of the back seat? Pulled out of that compartment of the back seat? A pornographic magazine, which was illegal in Saudi Arabia, and you could actually be killed for possessing one of those things. Fortunately, we were Americans. We didn't follow none of those rules, and we didn't have to worry about that. But nevertheless, this little 10-year-old kid now is in possession of a pornographic magazine. Not a good thing. That's not what we do as American soldiers. Absolutely not. We don't endanger the lives of the indigenous people. We don't do that. We try to protect them. That's why we're there. When we got the Log Base Echo, that's, after traveling these roads that aren't paved, that were created by other vehicles going through there during the ground assault, tanks going through and pushing landmines out of the way so that you actually have a clear way to single file go through, right? We get stopped because the rain had washed some of the landmines back over the road. And then somebody comes along walking in between the vehicles and says, don't get out of your vehicle, because this is 2 lanes worth of traffic. You got 1 lane coming this way, 1 lane going that way. And that's why we're walking down the middle, because we know this particular area in the middle is safe. But if you step too far over on the sides, left or right, you're going to be sitting in the middle of a minefield, and you may step on a landmine. I look out there, and I just look out the window, and I look as far down as close to the vehicle as I possibly can, which means I'm looking probably about 2 to 3 feet away from the vehicle. And I'm seeing these little metal things poking up out of the ground. Well, what they had done was they had used their aircraft to create what was known as cluster mine minefields. All right? These are like little tiny things, like little tiny things, maybe about this big. And that's kind of tiny for a landmine, right? They had these little things that poked up out of the ground and whatnot, and then all mixed up in the sand and everything, so you couldn't really see them. If you did see them, it was just like a little sliver of what it was. But I sit there and I look, and I start looking, and my eyes going back and forth, farther and farther out over this blank terrain of what looked like nothing but desert. And I'm not kidding you when I tell you where it looked like every 2 to 6 inches was another mine. I mean, I couldn't have put my foot on the ground off the road without stepping on one. There was just no way around it. That's how thick these landmines were in this particular minefield. And one of them got washed into the center of the thing, so the engineers were up ahead trying to get rid of it. So we got held up for about 3 hours waiting on them to clear that out, until finally we heard the boom, and then we heard 4, 5, 6, 7 booms from these landmines going off several miles down the road. Once they got that cleared out, they let the traffic go through, and we finally made it to Log Base Echo. Well, Log Base Echo was where they were keeping EPWs, enemy prisoners of war. All those folks that surrendered on the front lines? Well, come to find out, they had these little white cups, probably no bigger than this thing, right? Maybe just a little bit taller, like maybe right up here, and probably about that big around at the base, and maybe about that big around at the top of it, right? And they would be given about this much of this white pasty looking substance that went into that cup, and that's what they got on a daily basis. These people were starving to death, and that's why they were throwing up the white flag. That and the fact that they didn't want to be there, because most of the ones that we had in that EPW camp had actually been picked up in a grocery store, out of their homes, when they were out walking the streets with their wives, going to do something to take care of daily life, and were snatched up off the street and thrown out there on the front lines and told, you will fight or we will kill your family. So now these guys are out here, that little bit of food to eat, improperly equipped, thinking, that, you know, eh, the little tin siding that you see on our tin shacks out here, they had that for cover from our bombs. That wasn't going to stop anything. That wasn't stopping an M16 round. But that's what they had to protect themselves. That's what they were put out on the front lines with. And they had shoddy weapons that didn't work half the time. They were getting this little bit of food that they called food, that was something that looked more like you drink it. But it wasn't good. These guys were starving to death. So when our guys would pull up with a deuce and a half full of MREs, these guys were literally fighting each other. I mean, punching each other, kicking each other, knocking each other down, trying to be the first ones to get on that truck to get an MRE. Now, mind you, at the time, those MREs were terrible. I mean, they were so bad that Bush even offered to give Ethiopia, who was going through a major famine at the time, and people were starving to death by the hundreds of thousands down there, offered to give them some MREs to help stop that whole deal. Ethiopia rejected them. Apparently, I guess because they thought there were some strings attached to it that they didn't like. But they rejected it. So from then on, we soldiers referred to them as mules rejected by Ethiopia. That's how we referred to them. MREs, mules rejected by Ethiopia. And they were terrible. They sucked. Oh my God, they were horrible. I mean, just bad, dude. I mean, bad. I mean, the beef patty, man. You had to go through some hoops to get that thing to even remotely be palatable. There was some other stuff that just wasn't palatable. And you would see people trading stuff from MRE packs, from MRP packs, for cigarettes or this or that or whatever. We would trade them supplies to get certain things that we liked out of the MREs, because most of the time the MREs were terrible. But these guys were literally beating each other down, kicking each other, knocking each other down, almost trying to kill each other, trying to get to these MREs. I mean, it was horrible, dude. I mean, horrible. And, I hope to God you never have to smell the smell of burnt flesh. I really do. Because once you smell it, you'll never forget it. When I was over there, 3 o'clock in the morning one night, we hear this loud bang. And a short time later, our M8 alarms go off. Our M8 alarms are our NBC warfare alarms. In other words, if a chemical agent gets into the area, they're supposed to go off to give us enough time to be able to get into MOP level 4, don our masks, get our gloves on, get our overgarments on, and be fully protected from this thing. So that went off. And here we are. It's one of those nights where the moon ain't shining, where the moon's not out. And you can't see the moon at all. And it's pitch black, and you're inside a tent. I'm not kidding. Hand right here, pushing against my nose. I couldn't see my fingers. I could not see my fingers at all. It was that dark. So I'm sitting here trying to get into MOP level 4 in that kind of darkness, which is one of the reasons why they trained us. You put things away, you fold things a certain way, and you put them away in this particular manner. And then when you packed your gear, you packed it in such a way that you knew where that gear was. So when you needed it, you could grab it and go, right? Well, fortunately, they trained us like that. Because when it's that dark, you can't see your gear, and you can't get your flashlight out fast enough to be able to see that stuff and try and get dressed quick enough to protect yourself against a chemical agent. It's just not going to happen. That night, I got into MOP level 4 the fastest I had ever gotten into MOP level 4 before in my life. I think it was probably somewhere around 4 minutes and 15 seconds, 4.5 minutes. And we're allotted 8 minutes to be able to get into full MOP level 4. I did it in like 4.5 minutes in pitch black where you couldn't see it, because everything was exactly as I had trained. It was folded a certain way, it was put away in a certain way, and it was located a certain way within my gear. So I was able to get all that stuff and put it on in that quick of a time just by feel, because I knew where it was at. When your life is depending on it, you want something like that. So once I got into full MOP level 4, I go to walk out to go get on the perimeter with my rifle, to defend ourselves, and somebody walks in and says, no, it's not an attack. A helicopter, a medevac helicopter, did a nosedive into the ground. We need y'all's help to come retrieve the crew and the patients. So we get out there. The patients are still locked down. The patients that were put onto the plane were still locked down and so tightly locked into place that they didn't sustain any new injuries whatsoever from the crash. The crew chief, the one that sits back in the back, and the medic. The crew chief sustained some mild injuries and maybe some fractures and stuff, but he was fine. They got him taken care of, put back to the 12th Evac hospital, get him taken care of real quick. The medic, kind of similar, but he also struck his head, so he had a head injury, so they were spine boarding him up. The co-pilot, I forget exactly what the deal was with him, but I think something had struck him in the stomach, or the restraints or something were too tight, and he had some abdominal injuries. He had a concussion and a couple other things. Oh, and he had a piece of the aircraft that had punctured his chest and punctured through some lungs, through a lung. And then the pilot himself, I ended up on the pilot side. I don't know how I ended up over there, but I did. Part of the frame of the aircraft had actually gotten separated from the roof somehow in the crash. And when it did, it came in and it pulled it in, and it went in to the pilot's forehead right about here, and then pinned his head to the seat of the aircraft. And there was no moving him. I couldn't move him. I didn't know what to do. I'm sitting there trying to help these guys. I'm getting covered in blood. My mount gear is soaking up blood all over the place. By the time it was all said, done, and over with, all the patients and everybody were back in the 12th Evac care and in their medical care, and we were relieved of dealing with it. I went and took a shower. And that shower, I went to all 4 of our showers and spent 8 hours trying to wash the blood off of me, because there was so much blood involved that it soaked through my mount gear and got all the way down to my skin. That particular incident, that night, ended up giving me PTSD. And when I got out of the Army, and I went for my medical evaluation for my disability rating at the VA, I told them about the flashbacks. I told them about the accident. I even gave them the approximate time frame, who was involved, where they were taken, and what kind of helicopter that it was, and the people within my own unit that were out there with me. I gave them all that information. And then I go back in there for my actual physical evaluation and whatnot, and I see the guy that did my personal evaluation for that. I asked him, so what's the status on the PTSD thing? And he said, oh, you're not getting any disability for the PTSD because you don't have PTSD. You have PTSD-like symptoms. So explain to me all of my nightmares, all of my flashbacks, sitting there taking a shower and seeing the water run off of my body like it's blood instead of just plain water. How do you explain all that stuff? That's not PTSD? That's not dealing with that kind of stuff? But that's how the VA does you when you're a veteran. And you either have to figure out how to live with that and work around it, adapt, improvise, and overcome, or you can play right here on your psyche. And fortunately, to this day, the only thing that I know of that I still deal with from that PTSD is seeing the water run off of my body like it's blood. I still deal with that. But I've learned how to live with it. For me, having been a medic, having been trained in how to treat it, I was able to get control over it. And I got control over it. Like when I had my flashbacks and stuff, I got control over it by being able to reach down and touch the grass. I got control over it by being able to reach out and touch bushes. Because for me, that was telling me, no, you're not in the desert. You're in garrison. You're in civilian life. You're in the United States. You're not in Saudi Arabia. You're not in Iraq. You're not in Kuwait. And that would help. That tactile stimulation from the leaves and the grass and the trees and stuff like that would help pull me out of those flashbacks. And unfortunately, nowadays, things have been so blown up. You know, employers are afraid to hire people that are veterans that have PTSD because they're afraid that something might happen, and next thing you know, you got a massacre on your hands. Well, guess what, guys? The veterans are undergo treatment. Yeah, sometimes that might happen. It is a potential. But it doesn't happen as often as people think it does, nor does it happen as often as people expect it to. And when it does happen, there are ways to deal with it, to keep it under control so that it doesn't get out of hand. Veterans are some of this country's best assets. And a lot of times we get treated like trash. For those of you out there that tell us all the time, thank you for your service. We appreciate it. Thank you. And honor us for that stuff. You know what? That's fantastic. We love it. We appreciate it. We like to hear it. And we thank you for that. But tonight, I'm going to shoot you straight. And I'm going to tell you the truth. And something that a lot of other veterans won't tell you. But I'm going to tell you right now. You really want to honor us veterans? The way you do it is handle your freedom responsibly. You heard me right. Handle your freedom responsibly. Protect the Constitution. Protect what the nation stands for. Protect the principles that it was established on. You do that with the way you treat the people around you on a daily basis, no matter the color of their skin. No matter what sex they are. They're human beings. They deserve to be treated that way. You want to honor a veteran? Treat every human being with the respect and the dignity that a human being is entitled to. Because it was given to them by God, the Creator. Every single human being is entitled to it. You want to honor us veterans? The best way you can do it is handle your freedom responsibly. Defend it with your votes. Use your civic rights, your constitutionally given freedoms and rights and privileges responsibly. Respect those around you. Help those around you. You see someone down, don't kick them. Give them a helping hand up. That's how you honor a veteran who sacrificed their life, their body, a limb, or whatever, so that you could enjoy your freedom. So that you can sleep in a nice warm bed with an air-conditioned house, food in your belly, and not have to live out in the middle of a desert dealing with sandstorms or living out in the woods dealing with bugs. You have the ability to do that because people fought for your right to do it. They fought to protect, to keep it that way. Now, I know a lot of people have a different impression, a different political viewpoint of it. But let me tell you something. Once you've seen a dead human body that's been tortured and mutilated by someone who has absolutely no soul, no concern for human life whatsoever, and you can smell burnt flesh from where they've been electrocuted by being placed on a box spring that has no cloth and no mattress, no nothing in it. It's just the spring and tied down to it and then electrocuted, raped, tortured, body parts cut off of them, all because one man's greed to have more power and take over another country that he had no business doing. Don't talk to me about greed. Don't talk to me about oil. Don't talk to me about your politics, because that's what I saw. That's what I experienced in Desert Storm. And that's what Desert Storm was about. A tyrant who took over another nation for his own greed. It's time we start doing something about that stuff, folks. Because we're all human beings. We all deserve to be treated with respect and dignity. And people like me fought for your right to be free. Treat that with respect. Treat that with honor. Handle it responsibly. Because if you don't, it can very easily be taken away from you. And all it takes is one corrupt individual being in a position of leadership to strip you of every right and every privilege you've got. And I know that from experience because of Desert Storm. Sorry, folks, my apologies. I didn't mean to get so heavy on you guys, but I told you and I warned you that this vlog is going to be shooting you straight. Living life in truth. I'm not holding back any punches. I'm being straight up honest with you. That's what this vlog is about. And I got to be real with you. I got to. We all depend on being real with each other and being authentic with each other. None of these games anymore. We got to start being real with each other. We got to start being interested in what the truth is. Stop with the politics. The politics will tear you apart. Get down to the brass tacks of the nitty gritty of who we all are as human beings. Start recognizing each and every single one of us, no matter how dumb, stupid, or ignorant you may think somebody is. They still bring something to the table. If they have a disability, it doesn't matter. They bring something to the table. The short film I just got through doing, American Citizen, it's been picked up by a few film festivals already. It's nominated for 7 different awards. My co-writer who helped me write that script is in a wheelchair, has disabilities. But she brought something to the table and helped make American Citizen what it is. Everybody brings something to the table. Take the time to stop and find out what that is. Don't take advantage of it, but make use of it. Make use of it for the betterment of society, for the betterment of your life, for the betterment of their life. Everybody deserves that. So with that said, I'm going to make this a little bit lighter. Let's go ahead and bring up the Q&A time. We're going to open that up. So if you guys want, feel free to make comments in the YouTube chat. Leave a question in the chat. If you have any questions that you want to phone in, feel free to use that phone number that's on your screen. Phone in, ask any questions that you want. Like I said, any topic is open. I'm going to shoot you straight and I'm going to answer it honestly. All right, do we have any questions coming in, Cody? No questions, nothing? All right. In that case, we'll go ahead and pull that out. Let's pull up that link. So if you guys enjoyed what you saw tonight, if you guys have seen the rest of this series, the rest of this vlog, the other episodes from season 1, season 2, episode 1, if you like what we're doing, if you appreciate the fact that we're doing this, if you want to see us keep making movies and doing short films and doing feature-length films and stuff like that, it's a very expensive proposition to be able to do that stuff. I mean, just sitting here right now, I've got probably $20,000 or more worth of equipment that is making it possible for me to be able to do this live cast for you guys. Between the cameras, the microphones, the sound boards, the audio boards, the sound effect boards, which we didn't use tonight, but nevertheless, you know, they're all there. Having an extra phone to be able to do the call-ins for question and answer time, and all that sort of stuff. It all costs money. It all gets expensive. I'm not asking you to donate. I'm just saying that if you've considered it and you want to, or you are considering it now, then this link that's on your screen is going to be the best way to get that information to us and get that donation to us. Please make sure that you do it, you know, as a friend. Otherwise, of course, PayPal is going to take a percentage of it. Because, I mean, essentially, you get me being able to continue doing these vlogs in exchange for that donation. In the future, you know, I'm thinking about actually putting together maybe some merchandise for the show. If you guys are interested in that, let me know. But all this kind of stuff, you know, it all depends on funding, and this gets expensive. So if you would just, you know, consider supporting us, consider supporting our efforts, and you can do that using that link on the screen. All right. So with that all said, you know, my apologies for getting a little heated tonight. Like I said, I'm shooting you straight, coming straight at you from my heart. Um, so with that said, we're going to go ahead and close this down. So you guys have a wonderful night. We'll catch you next week for episode 3. I'm going to try and probably hit another topic next week, unless you guys have some more questions about my time in Saudi Arabia. If you do, join on early that night. Make sure you get your questions and your comments put into the live chat so that we can address those early in the next show. Because, you know, you may trigger something else that leads me on to something else that leads on to something else. And, you know, I'll do my best to answer those questions and be short and concise about it as much as I can. But, you know, the whole point of me doing this, guys, is for you guys to understand that we all have stories. We all have experiences. We all bring this stuff to the table, right? We need to slow down a little bit and start recognizing that. Technology is a wonderful thing, but when it starts taking away from our ability to relate to one another, there's a problem. And I'm really starting to see a lot of that taking place nowadays. And it breaks my heart. So with that said, we'll see you guys next week for season 2, episode 3. Stay tuned. I believe what I've got going on next week is I'm going to talk to you about being a medic and what caused me to become a medic. And you probably already guessed that it probably has something to do with that crash that gave me PTSD. And you'd be guessing right. But there's a little bit more to it than that. So tune in next week to find out what it was like for me being a medic in the military. Y'all have a good night and have a good week.